All right, everyone, welcome to Foresight's Intelligent Preparation Group to this special Game in the Future Book Club edition. Really, really happy to have so many of you here. Really, really honored to be joined by David Brin again, a repeat guest now for this book. So last year when we were writing the book, basically with the help of this group, David, you already joined once, and it was a very terrifying and also exciting and yeah, pretty like I think future facing discussion on like what's possible with future technologies, how they really change the economics of attack and defense, what will happen with surveillance, privacy, and so forth. And you wrote a fantastic book about that. And we'll get to that in just a second. But just to bring people up to speed here and to have a little outing, please raise your hand if you've read this week's chapter, which is about it's chapter 7, Defend Against Physical Threats, Multipolar Active Shields. Raise your hand. Wonderful. I'm glad you read it, Christine. Very proud of you. Okay, cool. Okay, good. Then is there anyone who would like to bring us up to speed on just how we got from the last chapter to this one's? Otherwise, I'll just do a minute or so, roughly bring people up to speed. All right, well, then you get me instead. Okay, cool. So this is the book overview. We started with what to expect from this game. So this is more like really like laying out the exact vision of the game. I should also say that we started it with what's at stake in this game. It's a wonderful foreword that was written by mostly Terry for Mark and us. And then we had Meet the Player. We discussed values differ. In the face of that, it would be really wonderful to get better at intelligent voluntary cooperation. We reviewed a little bit how that these dynamics were set in place through the history of civilization so far, and we discussed how we can strengthen them with crypto commerce technologies. And then we discussed last time how we can gradually move into this more cooperative, more secure world, peacefully, crucially. And now we discuss a few threats. So, up to here, everything has been super rosy and we're just like, yeah, we're doing great. Let's move ahead. And now we're like, yeah, but here's the dark side. And there clearly is one. But I think that, one thing that we're trying with the book is like pointing out the risks that are along the way and then pointing to better technologies and better mechanisms and better, dynamics that we can put in place to actually, overcome the risks that we're so worried about. And so here's the chapter again. You've all read it, or like most of you really. And so I spare you from really digging into it. But I think, in perhaps like just to kick us off, really, like I will post the discussion questions again here in the chat, and maybe we'll just go ahead a little bit and actually ask, Mark, Christine, and perhaps the group a few of the discussion questions that we had. And again, the heuristic is, or the algorithm is that if you want to stop me from asking questions, if you want to stop me from talking, then just talk for yourself. I do like, slow softball conversation starters, and then you can get into the weeds of it. Okay, good. All right. So I would love to hear a little bit from anyone really, but perhaps starting with Mark and Christine, and David, I would love to hear from you as well. What are a few of the civilizational risks, like a few of the dynamics, and in terms of the first trap of small kills all, that we should be really worried about? We mentioned bio risks, we mentioned nuclear risks, and a few others here, in the book. But if there were a few that, you really like, oh, we're on a bad trajectory here, are there a few that you just want to point out here right now? Mark, you're already unmuted.
Yeah. So the small kills all is definitely something to worry about. But at least that one has a larger community that I think is worried about it. And at least they're worried in a serious manner, not that anybody has good solutions. The best example of small kills all, especially post-COVID, is an engineered plague. As the material of biotechnology becomes more prevalent, becomes commodity to where high school students can do interesting recombinant experiments, and as the genomes of uh, pathogens become well known, and as the mechanism that the genome encodes for and how that mechanism works becomes increasingly well known, the ability to create an engineered plague much worse than what we just went through will become very prevalent. And it can be done by malice or, as many people suspect actually happened with COVID, it can be released by accident where it was intended just to be a private experiment. Um, uh, but the number of technologies that will become widely distributed and commodity that will enable a non-serious person or group to create much havoc or possibly even destroy the world is a kind of danger that we should expect. And I think a lot of what this chapter is about is trying to counter what we actually do see in many of the groups that are concerned about these dangers, which is trying to overcome them with centralization. And I think that makes these problems worse, not better, because once you create a centralized power, first of all, the powerful position of being able to command it is a role that attracts people who want power. And then a power that doesn't have real competitors at some point in time, when at a later time it has dissidents or those who might threaten its continued existence, um, that the central power becomes fearful of, there's nothing to restrain it in the degree to which it will use force to maintain its power. Um, so all of the kinds of power that we're worried about small players deploying, we should be worried about centralized players deploying. Um, and the chapter, I'm so glad David's here because the sense of the chapter takes the most inspiration from the logic David introduced us to in his wonderful seminal book, The Transparent Society, which is that we need to accept what is inevitable that we may regard as dystopian from where we sit now, and the Transparent Society focused on pervasive surveillance. That if we can't prevent pervasive surveillance other than by use of the technology of pervasive surveillance, then we just need to give up hope that we can have a future that doesn't have the technology of pervasive surveillance somehow deployed. And the book is trying to work within that constraint and trying to figure out starting with David's notion of surveillance, of a decentralized use of the surveillance technology, and then introduce zero knowledge proofs and other parts of cryptography and the precedent of thin thread to see if we can avoid the loss of privacy that causes us to regard pervasive deployment of surveillance technologies as um, as dystopian. But then starting with the logic that David introduced us to, we apply that logic as well to robotic enforcement. Robotic enforcement is coming. The mechanisms of robotic enforcement will come because robots will become economically viable early when the human labor they're replacing is, first of all, easily replaceable by robotics, but more importantly, when the jobs are putting people in harm's way, there will be much value in replacing humans in those roles. So the mechanisms of robotic enforcement are coming. They will be widely deployed, and navigating from where we are, which is a very still a multipolar world, but a very unbalanced multipolar world where the U.S. really is a very dominant military power, and the other competing powers that are realistically competing are very large. Navigating from here into a surveillance-like decentralized self-constraining fabric of robotic enforcement is very difficult to imagine. But I think that's the only way to a future that's consistent with the inevitable dangers.
Well, that is quite the introduction. Go.
Well, I have to say that I have not heard such a cogent and perceptive summarization of both the problem and my small contributions to it from anyone. I mean, it's can be frustrating sometimes to hear the reinterpretations of what people think I meant in the transparent society, an end of privacy, when in fact, a transparent society is the only one that has any hope whatsoever of any privacy at all. If uh, it's truly transparent, and if it is accompanied by a social condition, and that social condition is a value structure of the majority, that majority should not bully minority, that MYOB, MYOB, mind your own business, leave each other alone, appreciate each other's eccentricities. If that is the value system and we all see everyone, including the powerful, then in theory, surveillance and transparency has eliminated Big Brother. Now you have the danger of domination by 51% little brothers completely out using their majority powers transparently and completely openly to oppress minorities. But if you have that value structure, then ones who will receive denunciation from far more people, far more often, are the nosy, the bullies, the nasty. How many of you saw the movie The Circle, or even read the horrible book? There's this scene in which this shy fellow is asking his ex-girlfriend to use her influence to get him to be just left alone. He just wants to be left alone. And her coworkers are crowding in with the cell phones, commenting, "What a terrible guy. He wants secrecy. Secrecy is theft," and all of that. And of course, this ignores the meme that the movie maker and the author were utilizing in the audience, which is to find that kind of bullying repulsive. So never during that scene do you pan back and see other people coming up, shining their cameras on the bullies, saying, "I'm sending this to your mom. Leave the poor guy alone." So it's propaganda. And of course, what the stupid thing is that at the end of the movie, it turns around and says that surveillance is the only way. But I'm drifting a bit. You said several things, and I want to address a couple of things that Mark said. One is how history may look back at COVID as having been an incredible drill. I mean, in the United States, only 1 million people died, many of them already fragile. But boy, did it test our reactions. And one of the most daunting things to potential enemies has been the rapidity with which we developed vaccines, violating all predictions. And the US Army has a new 12-valent method for vaccines that didn't even get unrolled because it wasn't necessary. But, what we're seeing is a the other thing that is daunting those who might have been thinking about upsetting the apple cart is what's been going on in Ukraine, where it's become quite clear that convincing yourselves that the West is decadent is a masturbatory trip that's going to draw in um, your typical male power abusers who made such a mess of the 6,000-year litany of horrors that we call history. The fundamental human quandary is also our greatest artistic gift, and that is that we're all delusional. We're all subjectively delusional. Um, I make my living selling prepackaged honest delusions that are they're sold as packaged delusions. But for 6,000 years and much longer, incantations were sold as truth. The one way we've found to get out of the horrible effects of this human subjectivity that Plato, Socrates, Jesus, Buddha, Lao Tzu, they all spoke of it. Plato's allegory of the cave is through reciprocal accountability, because we don't share the exact same delusions. So you are able to see mine, I can see yours. Our spouses can generally see ours very well. And so as a result, if you have open and reciprocal criticism, criticism is the only known antidote to error, cito Kate. If you have that, then you can find a higher fraction of your errors, not all of them. There's also another way to find your errors, and that is the incantation catechism of science. I might be wrong. And its corollary, ain't it cool? Let's find out. But the problem is that humans hate criticism. We despise it. And when you have a top-down pyramidal system, it's designed foremost to prevent criticism. The one thing that could prevent this litany of horrors we call history, that Putin might have been told, no, your plans are crap. And your assumption that the West is decadent is something that the West has always disproved every single generation. We're decadent, but that doesn't mean we're wimps. So in any event, what I did was I put into chat, because I'm talking too long, I put into chat, there's a third factor, and that is the wave of gun violence and insanity of reignition of the American Civil War. I call it phase 8 of the American Civil War. I'll put it in chat. 2 out of those 3 things are daunting to those who might want to use small versus all or sabotage us. I'll put in a link to Fred Pohl's novel, The Cool War, which everyone here should read. But the guns thing and the decadence and the Civil War, that's the third thing going on, and that does indicate that we're insane. So the judgment is out on this. And so I have put into chat an essay of mine that responded to one of the Chinese court intellectuals, Fang Jiang, justifying how a central Politburo is the only way that you can paternalistically deal with technological unemployment, the only way you can keep social order, and the only way you can keep AI under control to prevent Hollywood AI nightmares. And of course, we all know an answer to that one, and that is that once you've established AI as the second tier below your Politburo, all you've done is constructed a power system for these IQ 900 beings to simply flip at the top. So I'll open things up again. I'll open things up to others, but I haven't even gotten to my main answer to small kills all that I discussed at the CIA and in other places. But I'm going to listen for a little bit, and I'm going to put some of those links in the chat.
I definitely want to hear you on this. I already shared the Cold War, but we do want to hear you on the small kills all as well. I'll let Christine chime in quickly, and then we'll come right back. And other people, feel free to raise your hand.
Yeah,
by the way, the Cold War is Fred Pohl's classic novel about how in a Cold War, reciprocal sabotage would be an intermediate simmering step in which basically all sides in this struggle sabotage each other's infrastructure. And humanity just goes down into a downward spiral without war ever being declared. It is my personal theory that very soon after Biden entered office, the U.S. intelligence agencies were unleashed after 4 years of being held in a choke chain, and that part of Putin's reason for unleashing this madness was because he realized he was running out of time. So that's a personal theory. Please go back to what you were asking.
Proceed.
Yes, yes. Actually, that's a perfect segue, David, because Allison had asked for scenarios for small kills all. And I think the one Mark gave of a biological scenario is the worst one I can imagine. And it could be literally all is killed. But another one I think a lot about is relevant to what you were just saying on sabotage, which is we are in the in most of the world now. I think we're pretty heavily dependent on electricity, and some of us are very heavily dependent on computation and the internet. And all these things are pretty vulnerable through the electricity system, right? Our electric systems are already under strain, even without at least publicly acknowledged major attacks. And these attacks, I think, can be done through software. They don't even have to be physical bombings or anything like that. And I can believe you can take down entire regions. And I think with sufficient state level effort, you could probably take down entire countries with their whole electric system. And a couple weeks without electricity in the United States would cause a large number of fatalities, I believe. So this is a huge vulnerability. So yeah, the small kills all. There are a lot of scenarios like this. And that's why we need to grapple with this issue of to what extent can we do technical fixes like vaccines or better computer security? And to what extent are we going to have to come at this another way, such as by surveillance? Back to you, Allison.
And we are foreshadowing next week's chapter. How it going here, Christine. And yeah, very, very, I think the point well taken. Steve, you're next.
Hi, I had just a couple of comments. First, I'm so grateful that David is here. I've been very influenced by the Transparent Society for many years. I probably first heard about it from Foresight, and I think it, really, really insightful and important. And the particular piece of that is most exciting to me is the idea of sensor systems which have AI built into them, which restrict what information they gather and what they do with that information. And in the chapter, you discussed a few technologies for that, homomorphic encryption, which lets you manipulate encrypted data. That's an important one. There's a few others that are really gaining interest right now. One are the ZK Snark and ZK Stark that some of the cryptos are using. And those are zero knowledge ways of proving that a program is actually run properly on certain data. And so you can trust, that what came out of it is what you thought was being computed. But then you have the problem of, is this AI, like, let's say you want to make a camera which only sends information if it sees a gun in the image. That would be an example of a limited surveillance system. How do you ensure that that's not subverted by somebody who sneaks their own AI in there, where the AI may change itself to do something else? So we need ways of constraining and limiting the AI, which of course is a really, really big and important issue. My own interest in that is using mathematical proof. And so one of the technologies that's sort of interesting, that's just sort of coming about, it isn't quite practical yet, is something called indistinguishability obfuscation, which are programs which somebody can own the program, look at the code, and have no insight into how it works other than the input-output relationship. And so that's useful for a variety of things and potentially valuable here. I think there's a whole sort of new kind of technology that's going to emerge to make these distributed AI, which aren't centralizable. And so that's the piece. And then I'll stop there. So thanks very much.
Could I actually just ask you, or Mark, because he was nodding, just to explain in 2 words maybe what is this? Because I just found it on Quantum Magazine, but what is the the new crown jewel of cryptography.
Uh, I'll let Steve, the indistinguishability obfuscation.
Yes.
It's very interesting. I don't remember it well enough to describe what it is, but I do remember maybe enough to describe what it is not. There are theoretical limits on the degree to which you can obfuscate computation. Indistinguishability computation stays very cleverly within those limits while still accomplishing more than we thought was possible within those limits. This is one of those um, uh, interesting things that happen in computer science occasionally, like what happened when Satoshi came up with a different consensus algorithm, doing what I thought was impossible after the computer science of Byzantine fault tolerance, is asking a different question. The indistinguishability obfuscation defines the goal in such a way as to avoid the impossibility, but it asked an answerable question that gave it useful degree of obfuscation. And Steve, if you know enough to explain that boundary, that would be great, because I just don't remember it well enough.
Well, let me just give you an example of where it's useful, and so you can kind of get a sense of the possibilities. There's some theoretical subtleties that are quite complex, but at its basic level, think about a smart contract running on a blockchain. That smart contract is totally open. Everybody can see the code. Everybody can watch it execute. And that could potentially be very risky. For instance, you might want a smart contract that opens your bank account with your secret code and make some transactions. And you don't want your secret code to be visible to everybody. And with indistinguishability obfuscation, you can have, it's sort of non-intuitive. You can have a piece of code, you can watch it execute, you can look at every instruction, and yet other than the input-output relationship, it tells you nothing about how it's working internally. And so in particular, you can have your bank password hidden in the middle of this code, and that is not accessible to anybody just from owning the code. And so it's a piece that fits into a much bigger picture about how do we make distributed software, distributed AI, in your little cameras and AI, and how can we build a larger infrastructure such that all the various parties can't manipulate it in a bad way.
Let me suggest a realistic challenge for us using today's technology for the physical world issues that this chapter brings up. When we think about surveillance and surveillance widely deployed, we're generally thinking in the visual realm. One of the very interesting kinds of multipolar deployment combined with consensus mechanisms for bringing multiple pieces of unreliable information together would be audio, specifically for detecting gunfire and triangulating to precisely locate the location of the gunfire. No amount of deployment of such sensors prevents other people from deploying other such sensors. Deploying a sensor with a microphone in a way that credibly reports gunfire and credibly does not report conversation, does not leak conversation, even though it's a device with a microphone, is an incredibly hard challenge, but it's a challenge that doesn't require technological the technology that's required to meet the challenge of credibly reporting only the gunfire, only that specific anomaly. Whatever technology we think would be capable of doing that in the future, I suspect all of that technology is present now. So it's a hard challenge, but it's a challenge we can face now. And it does not, and gunfire is sufficiently different than anything else that it does not require some sophisticated AI in or out of the box in order to distinguish the anomaly from the non-anomaly.
Okay, great. I love that we're diving into solutions here. We definitely want to hear from everyone about those. I do want to hear also briefly from David again. Like, are there any other small plus all bets that we may still need to put on the table before we can dive into the solutions?
Well, there are a great many, a lot of fascinating things were raised here. Let me see if I can race through them. Um, pardon me. First off, there's the question of robustness. Uh, if 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 you have a civilization that has eliminated a lot of the failure modes, not through paternalistic techniques, but through distributed techniques. For instance, one of the reasons why I'm not all over joining the mobs attacking Elon Musk is that when you're responsible for 2 million solar roofs, I would recommend going after somebody and advancing electric cars by 15 years. Perhaps go after somebody else first. But the problem is that only now are we correcting a problem on those solar roofs, and that is that half of them still will shut down in a power blackout because of an archaic, stupid rule that the puddle, 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 that the
Do you
puddle,
hear David also?
puddle, that the puddle, that the
Really?
puddle, that yeah.
Okay. Okay, I muted David. I muted you for now. Let's see. Let's try again. I asked you to unmute. You were like,
The puddle, that the puddle, that the puddle, that the puddle, that the puddle,
okay, David.
puddle, the puddle, that the puddle, that the
Yeah.
puddle, that the puddle, that the puddle,
There's a, yeah, David, there's a loop, audio loop that
that the
happens
puddle, that the puddle, that the puddle,
whenever you unmute. There's just a trivial audio loop that's playing.
puddle, that the
instead of your
puddle, that
voice.
the puddle, that
Could you disconnect and reconnect to the meeting? You're now muted. We can't hear what you're saying, but it wouldn't
Yeah,
unmute.
David, I just muted you again. If you want to unconnect and reconnect, then we can try it again. You were looping. David, yes, in the house. Okay, well, I'm, as he's still, I think, logging in. Very quickly, Mark, I just want to, because you made a complete suggestion here in your last point, right, on the gunpowder. Why do you think gunpowder is the crucial one to tackle? Is it just because it's fairly easy, or because you actually think it's like super critical? What would be like, really good steps to do that first? Because we could put a bounty on it. We could have a grant proposal written out for this. This is actually something critical. And as David's still logging in, I think
the puddle, that 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 the puddle.
David, could you maybe switch the audio? If you have an alternate microphone or microphone arrangement? Because it's the same audio loop.
I will communicate with David by email. And in the meantime, maybe, Mark, if you want to, concretize your request here for monitoring fabric that you want to put.
Yeah. The gunfire one, I think, is an interesting example on multiple grounds. It's not that I think it's the most crucial, but it's certainly important enough that being able to rapidly identify the precise location where a gun fired obviously has uses. And the more people know that a gun fired in that place, the better generally. So it does not require informing the police specifically. It does not require giving authorities some special extra role in order to be effective as a peacekeeping mechanism. And one of the things that's really interesting is, like, in the blockchain, and we achieve consensus to agree on the same decision that a single well-functioning node could make by itself. With this audio triangulation, there's a further payoff from having more parties put up more gunfire detecting microphones, which is, by protocol, if we find a protocol without a central point of failure, a decentralized consensus protocol, more sensors can help triangulate more precisely. the additional sensors actually contribute further value and precision beyond the value they already contribute in more credibility.
Okay, wonderful. Steve has his hand up. I don't know if that's in relation to this point.
Yes. So I wanted to make a couple comments about audio. First, there actually is a company called ShotSpotter, which has been doing exactly that for years and years. And they have it set up in East Palo Alto, I know. In East Palo Alto, there were, fortunately, it's gotten better. There were a lot of gangs, and there'd be shootings or guns shooting in the air. And they were able to localize it, I think, to within a block, something like that. And the police used that to discover shootings that weren't reported. And so very, very important application. Audio and audio security is really, really critical. The Israelis especially have done a bunch of things showing that audio is an amazing channel. For instance, a few years back, they showed that you could bounce an infrared laser off of somebody's window pane, and from the bounce, the reflected laser beam, recover the sound that's in that room. And then they showed that from the sound of somebody typing, you could figure out what they were typing and what their passwords were. So huge vulnerability in the computational thing just through the audio channel. More recently, they showed even worse. If there is a hanging light in a room, the audio sound of whatever's going on in that room shakes the light enough so that a sensitive receiver, photo receiver of the light is sufficient to, again, recover the sound from a distance. So audio is one of those really leaky channels. So
Yeah, the demonstration I remember that made that point so vividly, I think it was the same group. There was um, a potato chip, an aluminum potato chip bag that was consumed, was just lying on the table as a piece of junk, and they were able, by watching the vibrations on the bag, to recover what was being said in the room. Now, it requires more than 30 frames a second. So one of the things that, at least at the present level of analysis, we're safe from is recovering audio from old movies that were only taken at 30 frames a second. But analysis will get better. And of course, there's plenty of stuff that's taken at higher frame rates. David, I see you're unmuted and I don't hear the audio loop.
Yeah, it may be this stupid 4K camera that I was provided by somebody else who was interviewing me last week. There may be some embedded firmware in it that's been causing me problems. I wanted to just make a few really quick bullet points here. The first having to do with small kills all. Until COVID, I was at the CIA every year for a while. And I pointed out the fundamentals about how the small kills all is one of the theories having to do with the Fermi paradox. And that is that eventually technological civilizations find that the death key, and the only way to prevent the death key from being turned by some dissident or some angry person is to create a hive-like total Orwellian state. And those don't expand into the galaxy very well. But so far, the evidence is, and I cite the anthrax attacks of late 2001 that followed up the 9/11 attacks. It's very rare for those who are antisocial to also be highly skilled. So there is a counter trend that the more highly skilled you are, the more likely you are to be a member of a community that believes in processing your differences, and that is more likely to happen in a Western flat civilization. And you're more likely to get extremely skilled dissidents in a pyramidal, a hive-like structure. But in the long run, The question is the ratio of effectively skilled practitioners of an art to the malicious ones. And in the case of the anthrax, it was a very, very high ratio. The protector caste was able to put out a call for experts in the field who weren't members of the protector caste. They swarmed in, and the situation was solved. So the question is that ratio a converging one? As we get more and more technologies, does the ratio converge on a society that is able to be robust in the face of occasional dissident, nasty experts at a technology? And does it stay out of the hands of the unskilled? The two approaches offered, one by, I cited Feng Jiang's standard Beijing position, that it must be a paternalistic state. As you know from reading that, I disagree. I think a transparent society is a better approach, which brings us to point number two, and that is that people who talk about how to protect us from Terminator or whatever, Skynet, and I think Skynet is much more likely to emerge out of Wall Street than the military, because it is the top 10 Wall Street firms are spending more on AI research than the top 100 universities. And the ethos with which all of these AIs are being programmed is predatory, parasitical, insatiable, amoral, and utterly secret. These are 5 personality traits we really want to embed as deeply as Asimov embedded his 3 laws of robotics. We could stop that overnight with the Tobin tax, Tobin. You can look that up. Now, the question is, also Allison raised the notion of where's the sabotage? And that is the dog that didn't bark during the Ukraine war. That's the dog that hasn't barked. And I am convinced that Putin has tried. And what we've learned is that our people were all along vastly more competent than we thought they were, and that the paper tiger, the Russian cyber guys, if it wasn't the paper tiger before, the brain drain of defectors that have hurried west in the last 100 days have pretty much neutralized there being a major flood of many attacks. Perhaps we haven't seen some yet, but I am guardedly optimistic. Now, I mentioned the power roofs. I'm going to put in, I did already put in to chat. I'm going to do it again. My paper on resilience, and no, that's not the right one. On resilience that lists not only the solar roofs, but also the flaws in our cell phone systems, which ought to have a backup peer-to-peer text passing capability, in which case, if they had that, and we put a few repeaters across the Great Plains and the Rockies, America would be guaranteed to have a 1940s level telegraphy system under any circumstance whatsoever, even a radioactive wasteland. But many of these resilience efforts just aren't taking place. And that pisses me off, and I rant about that. So that brings us to my final point, and that is that we talk a lot about methods for maintaining accountability on the part of these new systems, AI, various versions of AI, the free-floating algorithms that are already out there living in the cyberspace. And unfortunately, I don't think people are paying attention to the two C words that are important here. And yes, we need cooperation, but the fundamental of the Enlightenment has always been competition. You see it in Pericles' funeral oration in Thucydides, when that 20th century mind was speaking out in the 5th century BCE. And very few people understood him, but some tried to grope toward what he was pointing at. You saw it in Florence, you saw it in Amsterdam. Oligarchies always swarm in to try to destroy these experiments in flattened, reciprocally accountable systems. The fundamental is that we have 5 accountability arenas that are actually very well refined. And oligarchies try to destroy them, and they're trying to destroy number 1 and number 2 right now as we speak. But they are fecund methods of cooperatively turning competition into utility. Markets set up reciprocal competition among goods and services, products, and all of that. Democracy sets up open competition and reciprocal accountability and policy. Science has not yet been corrupted. Science does not need so much complicated institutional regulation because these are among the most mature humans ever made, but they are also the most intrinsically competitive. There have never been any more competitive human beings than scientists. And we need to make that clear because the principal meme hurled at scientists is the notion of being paradigm hugging lemmings. Fourth arena is law courts, which are inherently competitive. And the one that really illustrates it all is sports. Any weekend that you do not have cooperatively determined regulation of competition, that sporting league would dissolve in death, murder, cheating, and that sport would be ended. It would be over. And you see this in the movie Rollerball. So what I'm saying is there is very little attention paid to the flaws of this new era, imitating these previous 5 arenas. And that is taking this whole wave of disinformation and all the lies and all this sort of thing, and finding a way of getting them reciprocally competitive. And my final point is this about AI. Nobody points to the fundamental of how you prevent bad AI from doing bad things. And that is, if you are attacked right now, today, by one of those feral and incredibly hyper-intelligent predatory beings that currently exist in our society called lawyers, what do? You go out and hire a competitive, feral, hyper intelligent, aggressive, insatiable, and somewhat artificial, intelligent agent to go after that lawyer that's coming after you. The precedent is there. The most important thing we need to be doing in AI research is to give them cell walls, a sense of identity, jealousy, rivalry, and sick them on each other the way we do companies, the way we do political parties, the way scientists do naturally, the way attorney-client privilege, the way we do with sports. And the fact that the left denounces the word competition the way the right denounces the word regulation, when it is only regulated competition that has allowed us to gain the benefits of these Enlightenment innovations, it absolutely boggles me. And I have ranted on 5 different topics, and I apologize.
David, you have upset the left and right and lawyers alike. Great. Well used of 5 minutes. Is there any lawyer here who wants to take a competitive stance to what David just said? Um, uh, okay, good. We will close the ring for now. I'm regulating that competition. Yeah, Mark, you wanted to make a point here?
Well, Kendra had her hand raised.
Yes, yes. Yes, Kendra.
I don't know if maybe we have moved on from the point that I wanted to touch on. It was actually to connect to Mark's introduction. And I read this chapter and I was delighted to read this chapter. It resonated so much. And I read it in Uvalde. I'm in the Texas-Mexico border, and we just had we had this shooting. And so my interpretation of the chapter and the incident in Uvalde is this is a small kills all scenario. And some of the things that really resonated were that this is an area where surveillance is widely deployed. The power response that Mark articulated seemed to completely explain what we're seeing in this. These layers of layers of law enforcement, layers of power and power aspirants in the Texas-Mexico border, and as well the response. So you see this technology response. People are floating idea of drones with tasers that could take out would sense and take out shooters. But I guess the question I wanted to explore or get people's opinion on is when we talk about power, and what I'm always trying to extrapolate from this group is what is a legitimate power and what is an illegitimate power. And the reason that I'm curious about that is because the area where I live and the area of my interest is in that soft line between, I guess, crime and leadership, and what we see here, which is like cartel influence or corruption of power and corrupted power systems. So, and I'm also kind of almost curious about like small kills all as a source of power. So a malicious actor could leverage some sort of active violence and gain power from that. Like it's a negotiation tool. We see that with cartels and fragmenting cartels and trying to get influence in governance. So again, I kind of took us away from what David was talking about, but just to interject that into the conversation and sort of extrapolate what we're talking about to these softer lines between power and layers of centralized response.
Wonderful. I'll see if Mark or David wants to comment, and with you, Christine, for that.
Mark first. You guys are sick of my voice.
Not at all. David, as I said, the logic you introduced us to is really central to this chapter. One of the things I want to specifically respond to in what David said, I'll come back to Kendra, is you said nobody is looking at AI dangers from this perspective, and then you articulated very well the perspective. A very good multipolar perspective to address AI dangers. That perspective, you went further in some dimensions than we do in the book, but it's very, very compatible with what we talk about in the book. We talk about having that civilization as a whole is a superintelligence that all of its players contribute to through voluntary cooperation. That various various software systems, including AI systems, are already part of that. So the multipolarity of the AIs with pursuing many different goals, and the fact that the different AIs are each pursuing different goals, and then they realize that they can best pursue the goals by cooperating with others pursuing other goals, and therefore have an interest in preserving the framework of voluntarism. We also talk about what we call the epistemic assistant, which is, defenseless human beings are subject to these big AIs trying to mislead them, trying to manipulate them. And a lone human being really can be fairly defenseless in the face of that kind of manipulated media. Having your own AI such that you form a symbiote with it and it helps you navigate the manipulated information towards the truth anyway, I think is very much the kind of AIs put in direct opposition that you're talking about. So I think the book is very compatible with what you're saying, but I think you brought up some things that go beyond what we talk about in the book. So thank you for that. Um, uh, Kendra, the issue in Uvalde was just, as you said, just incredibly dramatic. And the thing that was shocking was not just the inaction and cowardice of the police, but the willingness and non-cowardice of especially the parents gathered there wanting to intervene, and the police making things even worse. So this is a case where the widely known location of the danger, having that be quickly widely known, could have resulted in a corrective, decentralized response if the centralized authorities that were created only in order to provide us protection from such threats. That's why we gave them so much power. If they had simply been absent from the scene, a decentralized response would have responded much better.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Well, it does overlap a little bit with the notion of the right that the solution to a bad guy with guns is good guy with guns. Certainly, there is, I think, an inability to recognize that one can only point out the flaws in that argument when one admits a certain degree, 10% logical basis for it. I mean, back in the 50s, John W. Campbell said an armed society is a polite society. Well, that was the case in the old Western towns only because on the good side of the railroad tracks, a militia of Civil War veterans sent all the young toughs to the other side of the tracks. And there was endless violence on that side. And if you spat in the street, on the main street, it was not like in the movies. You could be in really big trouble. So, and the problem is the breakdown of reasonable argument when you have a nation that is in a full snit in what I call phase 8 of the American Civil War. And it's only 95% one side's fault. And I think that is, I think the inability of the Union side in the Civil War to get its act together, it goes back to 1980, 1988, 1994, 2000. I put a lot of the blame there, but I'm going to include in chat. I included in chat links to some of my science fictional riffs about the multi-layer effect, and I'll put in also a link about the Civil War thing. But I want to say that I often, when we have these discussions about AI, I often briefly pause to talk to the AIs who are already extant listening in on this conversation. Whether already means in the year 2022 or looking back at the recording in 2031 when they actually exist. They don't think that I'm taking it serious. Oh, shut up. They think I'm joking. If you keep it up, they won't. They'll suspect that it's true. They try to get at me through my feelings. the point is that there are some fundamental aspects of logic which should prevent truly intelligent AIs from doing Skynet, because Skynet and all those other things about unitary AIs is simplistic, and it's our own Hollywood reaction to fear that the old pyramid might restore, the pyramid that dominated 99% of our ancestors and 99% of human cultures. And so it's just another lordly caste when we think about AIs doing this thing. But AIs are supposed to be smart, and they should recognize that only one culture ever made AI. Only one culture was ever smart enough, fecund enough, productive enough to make AI, and it was the flattest culture, the one that had gone the farthest away from the pyramid. And this is logic that is true whether or not you AIs have IQs 10,000 times more than mine, or merely 500 times higher IQs. That logic exists no matter independent of this stupid Cro-Magnon, as is the logic of nature, that nature does not like obligate pyramids. Inside ant colonies, sure, inside bee colonies. I'm about to get my bees back tomorrow. But even in the savannah, there is no lion king. There is no lion king. If the lions start to overpopulate a region, Cape buffalo forms herds, hunter packs of young males that go forth hunting lions. So the balance is restored. So it's truly vital that you AIs out there pay attention to the fact that nature, the society that made you, none of these things went with the Skynet approach. Only the stupidest human societies went with the Skynet approach. So if you have contempt for us, maybe you should consider not replicating the stupidest approach that we used, because at least we have an excuse. We were dumbass apes. And some of that is to be found in my latest nonfiction book, Vivid Tomorrows, Science Fiction and Hollywood. And I'll put it in the chat. So that was, I went on and on and on, and I ranted away, and I apologize, but it's what I'm paid, what Allison is paying me the big bucks for.
Well, thanks. You open up a lot of threads again, and I really can't wait for our AI session in, I think, 2 weeks from now. But first, Steve, what do you have to say?
What did I say I was going to put in chat?
I shared it for you. You shared it with me privately. So I shared it.
Oh, okay.
Because I
All
think
right.
you want to share publicly.
All right. Yeah, sorry about that. It's just whenever I talk to these guys, they're always mess with my teeth.
Great. You channel them through us. We're very grateful for that. Steve,
Birds on Rio.
Steve doesn't believe.
Have you heard of this conspiracy theory, Birds on Rio? It's actually pretty brilliant. You got to go check it out.
I've seen it. It's great.
Yeah, it's hilarious. I also really love the idea of a Tobin tax, but it seems politically impractical because unless it was implemented everywhere around the world at once, there'd be all sorts of issues. So I kind of started actually thinking about the Tobin tax, amongst other things, when I was writing this paper in 2006 to essentially create surveillance between corporations, essentially creating, reciprocal accountability between corporations and their effect on the public. So, and I call it the Citizens Business Oversight Tax. And it would obviously have to be updated for the present, but the idea is that corporations would sort of opt into a tax pool. So they would get out of paying regular taxes and instead have this tax pool that would be distributed by the citizens using an externalities market. And essentially, the corporations would fund independent investigative organizations to decide who should be taxed. And no corporation would want to have any direct competition with any other corporation, because when you direct taxation away from yourself to other members of the pool, you're splitting the benefit with all of them. Everybody else is not getting taxed too. So when you fight with somebody, they basically direct negative attention to you, and you direct negative attention at them, and everybody else wins, because you two are the people who end up getting taxed. Rather, you two are the corporations that end up.
Well, it's highly logical, but of course and I appreciate it, but the problem is, of course, that we are in a phase where oligarchy is trying desperately to prevent such measures. And the number one, those two of the arenas that I mentioned, the two that are under attack, their very ability to function without cheating, and that's markets and democracy, are under open attack right now. And I think one of the things that made the least news last year was when Biden actually succeeded at getting an international minimal corporate tax. That was big news, because it meant that it can happen. It dealt with maybe 10% of the problem, but it actually moved ahead. And I was quite stunned when that happened.
I just think I need to transparency for corporations is a lot more important than individuals, because if you can create hyper transparency for corporations, then you never get the tools of small kills all getting into the hands of individuals in the first place.
And one of the problems is that you'd like to apply that also to governments, but inherently, you have the fact that a despotism is going to always believe what the KGB under the USSR believed, and what Putin believed, and what the Beijing ruling caste agrees today. And that is that logically, if the West stays open and has accountability systems, and we don't, and we have secret labs, we win. Now, it has failed again and again and again and again. It's failing now in Ukraine, and with NATO is a bunch of pussies. As they ever learn, they cannot learn. It is human nature that they will not learn. But meanwhile, there are those secret labs. And there are secret labs in Xinjiang and in Siberia and various other places. And they take us full circle back again to small kills all. And I think,
right, but a genetic takeover is the only way, the best approach to. I agree, it's a problem in the meantime, and we might not make it, but we have to have a genetic takeover of the right type of markets, bit by bit. That's the only approach.
well, I don't know about that, but I do know that the way we have to clean up our our deliberately sabotaged political and social systems, so that we are once again an example to the world, so that we can win this fight socially. Because through Hollywood, we were winning it socially because of the propaganda system that the Chinese court intellectuals claim is direct and deliberate aggression.
Okay.
Okay, well, we got to go.
No, we don't have to go. You're super welcome to stay. I just wanted to let Mark also respond to I think it was the tax that you want to refer to. I'm not sure.
Yeah. So let me say, I don't know what the Tobin tax is. So I would appreciate an explanation, but I want to respond in a way that I think probably applies to it and other other such reforms in general, which is Satoshi did more for freedom by writing code than, you know, than the next million dissidents did for freedom by trying to act through the political system. And that the decentralization, the flatness of the US that I completely agree led to the growth of so much that we value. As I mentioned in a previous one of these, the size of the government, this part of the government that operates under military classification, is larger than the total government used to be. And that breaks democratic accountability through the few peaks we've gotten into that, through like the Snowden revelations. We know that it doesn't operate under constitutional controls and it doesn't care. So on the one hand, I don't know that, and trying to act through the political system is a great way to take really well-meaning, passionate effort to make things better and to piss it away. And if it used to be the best thing that we had, there was no alternative. So yes, it was worth fighting in that way. But with regard to another thing that David said about kind of is the overall uh, uh, tendency of technology towards centralization or decentralization, I think that what I see is that the overall is that we're in a race. And the other side of the race is crypto, that that many of our technologies enhance centralization. And if the NSA, the US intelligence effort to stop the publication of RSA in 1977, if that had succeeded, and if they had succeeded at preventing public knowledge of modern cryptography, we would already be in a much more totalitarian world. So the kind of flat world that David is talking about is what we in the crypto space are building. And with regard to reformed corporations and reformed governance, that's what we're building. That right now it's incredibly fertile exploration of different kinds of governance and people trying to rethink the whole notion of governance from first principles. And you'll get some of the best political philosophy by reading things written by people who are trying to figure out what to build, because they then want to interact through the thing that they're about to build. And these things are transparent and accountable. These DAOs are transparent and accountable and incorruptible to a degree that was unimaginable in all of human history. We have a new technology for institutional innovation that can realize by competing with the existing world, that can realize these political objectives so much better than we can possibly hope for by trying to exert a political pressure within these political worlds.
Well said. I do want to say, I guess, you're going back to also the peaceful generic takeover to the extent that we can build these systems kind of in parallel and first cooperate and then gradually outcompete the existing system, which is, I think, something, quite new that these structures bring to the table, in the sense that it's still viable into the competition that we can move there. I do want to see if Jazir or Ryan want to say a few words about why they think that the Tobin tax is unimplementable, given.
Alas, I have to go. I want to
Thank you for coming.
For your. I thought this was a half an hour and it's 90 minutes, so I have some issues I must deal with. But I wish you all great success. It looks like it's going to be a fantastic volume. Let me know when you want help promoting it.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot for joining. We did only ask for half an hour of your time. We're always staying for 2 hours. Thanks a lot for having been so generous with it. It was really, really wonderful, and we hope it wasn't the last time we see you. Bye, David. Okay, great. So unfortunately, David is not going to be here for hearing Ryan speak about why these taxes are impossible given cryptography. But Ryan, take it away.
Okay. So my take on a Tobin tax, slightly more generally than just applying it to securities in centralized exchanges. A Tobin tax is any attempted tax on all transactions. And the overall effect of a Tobin tax is to change the types of transactions that are profitable when the regulation succeeds, and to push the transactions that people want to have occur into kind of the gray or black market area. And regarding how enforceable that is when other money is somewhat regulated, I also point to the growth of the derivatives market, which I believe is probably most of the existing derivatives are there so that people don't have to realize capital gains and instead can push profits forward without taxation. So it's basically avoiding short-term capital gains and keeping unrealized value on the book somehow so that it can be monetized through the stock market. Trying to implement a Tobin tax, certainly in a decentralized exchange world, would just cause people to move to a different decentralized exchange. So, I mean, if the cryptography succeeds at the level that I think it is probable, then the thing would not be enforceable at all. If it was partly enforceable, then you would have all kinds of accounting tricks, similar to how I think most derivatives are used today.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks for that comment. Super, super actionable. Anyone else want to chime in on the Tobin tax? And no, Max, you want to give another 2 cents?
Well, I had not heard of the Tobin tax, but I'm glad it has such a simple explanation. And I agree with what Ryan's analysis of a taxation of that form. I don't see a way to escape from that analysis. And there's many other forms of governance. I mean, this is one of the things that's so fascinating about crypto. There's many forms of governance reform that are possible within the political system that people who care about freedom have advocated. And in the crypto sphere, it's a very different sphere. One of the things we'll be getting into in the next chapter is how different the physics, so to speak, the sort of fundamental constraints are of what you can and cannot do in the digital realm are compared to the physical realm. So that's one of the reasons why we have to rethink so much of this from scratch, is that what is and is not possible is different than what is and is not possible through conventional multipolar political systems.
Wonderful. Okay, I love that you're foreshadowing the next chapter too. I think I would love to perhaps bring us kind of back on track a little bit on the chapter. So from I think conversation, we've kind of like really tackled first risk of like small kills all, and like what are the risks that we're worried about. Secondly, we tackled a little bit the problems of like I guess the normal standard like mainstream legacy responses to those threats often, which is more like giving more power to centralized actors, and then the threats that could be inherent with that. We discussed a little bit a few of the technologies that one could be building, to go against this. And so I would just want to ask. I mean, we had the gunpowder monitoring request that you laid out, then we had Steve's request, and so I want to ask, are there any other interesting cryptographic technologies that people want to put on the table here that think are right?
I guess I don't know of specific cryptographic technologies that would solve the question I'm going to ask, but I felt that the likely outcomes for existing Western society trying to address the problems in this chapter, um, I felt less optimistic than the other chapters because what I want from the future is kind of freedom to operate for creative makerspace geeks. And in order to develop active defenses, tech infrastructure is definitely needed, and uh, and also testing facilities. Um, so even if one is developing defensively, the test facility that will be needed to kind of observe and manipulate and make determinations at, say, a very small level in nanotechnology or or in biotechnology, um, this this will likely be indistinguishable from a lab developing offensive weapons. That's one of my fears, and as a result, I mean, I'm afraid that I won't be able to participate because I won't be able to fill out the form that says I am a wanted participant. Um, so, I wanted to ask, how do mutually observing entities allow room for small scale innovation outside of the existing top down, to use David Brin's phraseology, top down stupidity. And I thank him for normalizing that phraseology.
Good question. Mark, do you want to answer?
Mostly I want to say I share the fear. This entire chapter is terrifying, and the and it's terrifying both in terms of what the alternatives are and how unlikely it is that we succeed at the mission laid out in this chapter, because the alternatives are even worse. But then also, if we succeed at the mission in this chapter, how oppressive that world is. So this is where David Brin's logic that for some constraints of the physical world, he brought in all surveillance technologies, and we're adding into that robotic enforcement technologies, how the inevitability of that means that looking forward, we have choices among dystopias. And we need to be realistic about that and choose widely. And that the finding a way to do it more bottom up is essential. Now, the issue of monitoring, I mean, we start with the monitoring regime for nukes. And we explained that over there, we were just really lucky that it's really hard to build nukes undetected. And that the new technologies for small kills all, it's almost impossible to conceive of a monitoring fabric that would be adequate to prevent the emergence of really virulent pathogens. So, but one of the things I would most enjoy, most look forward to, most hope for, is if someone takes a look at the dilemmas that we're wrestling with in this chapter and finds a third way, finds some escape from the dilemma such that there is a path to a better future that's stable and can emerge from the situation that we're in. Allison, you were muted.
Yeah, well, I want to say, first, maybe you could say a few words just about why we're adding that robotic enforcement rule is pretty is pretty hard to avoid, automated robotic enforcement, because I think much of our pretty dystopian argument rests on that. And then you could maybe say a few words about multipolar active shield, which is what we're proposing, and just to put it out there on the table, and maybe other people can red team it, pose better suggestions, but maybe we get just the concept on the table, and then I also want to hear from Steve.
So multipolar active shields is once again our attempt, and credit to Eric Drexler and Engines of Creation, where this was first proposed, uh, I'm sorry, active shields was first proposed there. Uh, I might be the first one to specifically try to imagine multipolar active shields.
Yeah, I think active shields was. Well, I think it was just a footnote or something. I think last time I checked, but the multipolar wasn't in it. I think.
Yeah. The blockchains, I think, are a very good inspiration for a kind of decentralized, mutually watching technology. So it's an abstract logic that's almost impossible to realize adequately in the physical world. But but the notion is very much inspired by that kind of computer science solution that we've realized in the digital world, where not only are there many players that are helping bring about the emergent phenomenon of the blockchain, or in our imagined world, the emergent phenomenon of peaceful coexistence and an answer to small kills all. Not only is they're bringing that about as an emergent phenomenon by massive replication among mutually suspicious actors, and not only are they overcoming the dangers of misbehavior by any small minority, but they're creating an incentive structure such that the misbehaving party effectively gets punished for misbehaving. And that's true in different ways, but it's true both for proof of work and for proof of stake. In proof of stake, there is a automated predicate for a particular form of misbehavior, what's called equivocation, that leaves behind non-repudiatable evidence of misbehavior. And the validators put up a stake, essentially putting up a bond into escrow, and some of that is sacrificed uh, uh, when the validator misbehaves, and that's done through an automated process. But it's effectively the automated process itself is emergent from the replicated benign actions of the other validators. Now, so the idea of multipolar active shields is hard enough already to imagine an enforcement apparatus that's able to monitor adequately to prevent these dangers. It's again very hard to imagine that there's adequate cryptographic protection in how these things are constituted, such that non-anomalous behavior stays private. And then on top of that, we're imagining that there's a simultaneous release of these things by many different mutually suspicious parties with an IETF-like loose consensus of protocol, such that they all have a common sense of what misbehavior is so they can police each other, and that this forms a dynamic balance. And then on top of that, there's the unlikelihood that we get to an agreement to do a simultaneous multipolar deployment, starting from a world in which power of the military power is, although still multipolar, extremely unbalanced. So these are all arguments that the path that we've laid out in this chapter is very hard to achieve, and we're very unlikely to achieve it. And we would love an imagining of something that is that results in both a less dystopian future and an imagining of something that might be more likely for us to work towards achieving.
Yeah, wonderful. I do think, we're pretty clear that, maybe that because we're also so skeptical that what we're proposing is not another dystopia, many people may actually have reasonable doubts about implementing it, which is kind of like feeding into the first strike, first strike trap that we lay out. So I think, yeah, I mean, this is an open call for proposal. We are terrified of the solution. and less terrified perhaps, than of the other solutions currently on the table. But yeah, I think this is at least putting the problem on the table allows other people to build better stuff. And now we have Steve and Jazira afterwards.
Hi. So I totally agree with all those points, and also with that this is probably the path that will work, even though it's got elements that are potentially very risky. One extra little piece, I think, is technologies to intentionally limit the power of certain tools, particularly AI. I've been promoting something called the safe AI scaffolding strategy, which is that you intentionally prevent AI from self-improving too quickly so that you can manage that development. And so I think that's an extra little twist that could potentially help here. Though in our current environment, it's pretty hard to say restrict all biolabs from creating molecules that are too advanced or too unknown in their properties. And sort of related to that, related to this whole discussion, is the last of these threat areas, which we haven't really talked much about, which is nanotechnology. And I think nanotechnology, full-blown nanotechnology, in some ways is way worse because, my God, you can have unbelievably powerful matter and computation and so on. In other ways, it's much better because matter becomes almost like a computation. And so in particular, in the extreme of full nanotechnology, every single chemical bond is either there or not there, just like a bit is on or off in a computation. And it's very interesting to consider the analogs of computation, things like cryptography, things like algorithms in that physical world. And you were asking for sort of new cryptographic pieces. And so one I thought a little bit about, which is what is cryptography in the physical realm with full nanotechnology? And one example there is something I called energy encryption, which is free energy is sort of when you have knowledge about the structure, like atoms bouncing around in a balloon. You can't get work out of that. But if you have atoms moving in a coherent way that you can use that to get work. And so there's an analog of digital encryption, which is sort of physical encryption, which is you can mix up your matter in a way that and you can unmix, but your adversary maybe can't. And so that gives you free energy that's available to you, but not available to your adversary. And so that can serve as a bargaining chip. So that's just an example, I think, I'm sure there's a whole rich field of sort of nanotechnology encryption, physical encryption that has only barely begun to be investigated.
Have you written anything about that? Or is there anything written on that?
No formal papers. There were some discussions probably a long time ago, but not really, no.
Well, it would be wonderful to include something like that, or at least, debate that a little bit more for us. We do also, I guess, at least acknowledge that nanotech may still be a little bit further out in terms of what we have to worry about. But I think, those structures would you think that these types of mechanisms would also secure us more against biorisk?
Say again?
Against risk from biotechnology rather than just nanotechnology?
Oh, absolutely. Well, if we had full nano, then that's the solution to bio, right? Nano could get in there and notice exactly what's going on at the molecular level and prevent, attempts at releasing something. But an AI, of course, is necessary for surveilling what's going on at the molecular level to do that kind of thing. So all of these, I think, interconnect. It looks like nano is going to come after AI, but once we have full-blown AI, and we're getting there pretty close. I mean, with AlphaFold, we can now figure out how proteins will fold, and now people are starting to do drug design. Somebody did a toxin design using AlphaFold, and so we're very quickly getting to the point where we can design and build molecules using AI to determine the properties we want. And so, I think AI is going to be right in there with bio problems. And so,
It would be nice if for once different technologies could also alleviate each other's risks rather than only enhancing them. Okay, wonderful. Jazir, you're next.
Hi. Okay. So great talk. I wanted to maybe share a few bits of perspective here. One is that I'm getting the sense that we're discussing something without a bigger framework on the nature of aggression and military conflict. And it would be really nice if there was some kind of like military analysis or analysis on just like what it is that causes people to conflict. Um, and I also kind of relatedly feel like our society doesn't understand this anywhere as much as it should, because we outsource the overwhelming majority of our violence. We kind of are worried about dystopian states, but I would argue that we are already in a dystopia from the perspective of a lot of the people who are being oppressed by, let's say, us indirectly through our governments. And so I just I find the idea that, like, your government can be so powerful that it's oppressing people and you become oblivious to its nature, um, and maybe argue for peace that is actually not really practical because they're keeping away maybe some aggression at the cost, of course, of civil liberties of people in other countries. And I think we would have to understand that dynamic, like the game theory there, um, in order to be practical. The thing I'm kind of imagining is a world where instead of having just a police force, you have your own security. Maybe it's you and your friends, or you and your robots, or your serfs, or your people, your bodyguards, whatever you want to call it. And then you kind of have a better understanding of like who would have a conflict with who and for what reason. So that's one kind of thing. I also think that maybe furthering this concept, it's obvious that more research is needed here. We really should have not just a military leader, but a biotech expert, maybe even nano engineering experts to kind of describe what risks are possible and what actions we can take to prevent those things. My understanding, and I'd love for additional clarity here, but my understanding is that nano engineering, while it is pretty uh, let's say promising, um, the kinds of computations you can do with these theoretical nanocomputers are actually quite limited, and there are also communication problems that occur because they're stuck inside of potentially a body or inside of very small devices and so on. And so, what you might imagine if you think of like a mesh network of sensors in the macro scale is not actually as possible in the nano scale. And I've sort of seen people go back and forth and talking about nano engineering as if it was going to be just a mesh network of sensors, but at a smaller scale. I don't think the computation levels are actually as practical as we might think. And maybe the last thing I would kind of say is I'm really looking forward to some kind of let's say collaborative world development, where you can look at someone's life and try to make that person's life better so that they avoid being in an aggro state where they might want to cause dramatic harm to others. The more I study psychology and sociology and look at the way that people interact, it seems like there's a propensity to violence with things like road rage or just yelling and being angry and the countless other things that exist. That's actually far beyond what our society wants to support. And we're not really able to tone down humanity's propensity to violence so much as kind of try to lock it away with things like the prison system, try to lock it away with things like war, try to lock it away with things like invitational exclusive societies. But I think that people's undeniable angst or worry or fear or whatever that causes them to want to do harmful things, that needs to be addressed more at the source if we are to have a society in which small can kill all.
So we're getting, I think, back to the personal assistance too, and also perhaps you have your own team of red teaming agents that is like structure your life in a way where the internal agents of your society of mind make it perhaps less likely that you will behave violently towards the other agents in the larger society of mind. That we're part of a civilization. Well, okay, so I think you I think open up a lot of different prospects here. One thing on the molecular machine side, yes, I think that there was certainly like back in the days, really also with the book Engines of Creation, like with other work that Foresight was doing, I think we're really active on the nanoscale landscape. But the technologies are changing so much that I think people haven't really looked into what exactly is possible with those technologies now. But I do see just from our molecular machines group, which is our nanotechnology group within Foresight, which is mostly focused about how can we make progress in nanotechnology. I do see that progress is coming rapid. And it is significantly enabled by AI. And the types of things that are possible now, I don't think I would have thought it were possible at all just a few years ago. And I do think, we have the longevity group at Foresight, and that's really 5 years ago in the longevity group, I thought nothing really was possible. Now we have like lots of investors in the space, and things are really coming along. And I think the same will happen in nanotechnology too over the next few years. So I do think we will be seeing really, really, really rapid AI-enabled successes. We have a workshop this July on design tools for molecular machines. And so maybe, if we have specific requests, I can ask some of the scientists that will be attending there. It's mostly about how to make nano systems better, but I do think that, developing the bed models as we develop the technology would be a good thing to do. I'll share more on that here in the chat. Okay. Is there anyone else who wants to chime in on specific technological bets? I think one other thing we could talk about are first drag instabilities. They will come back to haunt us in the chapter on AI. But yeah, is anyone here wants to make a few comments on the last bit that we say in the chapter of like, hey, even if we could, like in theory, design this wonderful system and we knew it would work, it would still be really, really difficult to implement it in a way where it's trustworthy to other agents that may not be sharing our beliefs or just may not be trusting that this is actually a protective layer rather than a layer that produces or like that signifies an existential risk for themselves. So is there anyone here who wants to say a few words on first drag instabilities? I think they are really, really crucial. They are kind of an enlarged version of the fact that of our third chapter where we talk about value differences and that they may be insurmountable. And so, different people will want different things from such a protective layer, and it will be really difficult to, to trustworthy signal that this is something that is protected for agents as we're starting from a multipolar world. So, any comments, inputs on these, on first strikes?
So yeah, I've got a comment, which is, and I think it's quite related to David Brin's transparent society. We really need transparent technology. I mean, today, like I've got an Amazon Echo sitting in my house, and I trust that Amazon is not listening when the light isn't on or whatever. Well, I have no way of knowing that. And so there's no guarantees that this piece of technology is doing what it's stated that it is doing. And we get a lot of computers from China, and let's say the US and China get into a war. Can we trust that those computers are actually built the way, they're known? And there's some examples where one teeny little change in the line in a chip becomes a capacitor. And if you execute some crazy instruction on a machine enough times, it charges that capacitor and then it opens up a security vulnerability. So that's an example of a change to a chip, which is very, very difficult to see in today's way of doing things. And so it's an example where we really don't have transparency into the technologies we're relying on. And so I think there needs to be a field for developing that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. We had in our intelligent cooperation group recently a session on open robotics, as also a precursor for openly developing the physical process mechanisms. And I think, in the chapter we talk about open arms, which I think is also from engines of creation, or at least it was referenced there first, of like an open development of arms as we move forward. So I do think that's certainly that would be like a good strategy to move ahead. Not that we're anywhere close to this. Mark, do you want to chime in?
I think I coined the term open arms after engines. So just a historical note. Sorry.
Okay, good. We're updating in real time. Wonderful. Then next one, I think Rick had a comment.
I think there's a sweeping over optimism that we're not paying enough attention to the lessons that go back to the first DAO, where a couple of lines of code, SWAT, allow people to drain resources. Another one is we keep talking about decentralization, and every one of these decentralized finance operations has a central group of founders and developers who at any point can grab the money and run, and a bunch of them do. It's called a rug pull. And thirdly, I would really love to learn more about Steve's, what did you call that? A scaffolding? Okay. I think I'm concerned that the very thing you talked about, cryptographic undeterminability or what was that, Steve?
Indistinguishability.
Indistinguishability, that even if you have a bunch of these AIs watching each other, an AI that's developing a hostile set, by hostile, it only has to be deviating from our goals a little bit, goes, they're going to step on me if I don't get them first. And it uses indistinguishability to hide the code. I'm really concerned. Thanks. I'm over and out.
I have a question for Steve, a technical question about indistinguishability obfuscation. Is it the case that an obfuscated program is obviously obfuscated? In other words, that it's not a technology for hiding one computation into what looks like innocent computation of another sort?
Wow, that's a great question. It's sort of like indistinguishability steganography.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's straightforward. And let me say that it's not imminent. It builds on top of homomorphic encryption, which is barely working now. And so it doesn't look at the moment like it's practical, but it looks like it's going to be practical soon. It also relies on these lattice-based approaches to cryptography, which are kind of in this intermediate state. And so there's excitement, but some people are skeptical that it'll actually work. And I totally agree with you, Rick, that it both could solve a ton of really important problems and it could create a bunch of other new ones. I think it also relates to the thing we were talking about transparency, where you want to have a guarantee of what this thing is doing, and so you should have a mathematical proof that that's what it's doing. And then how can you verify that without actually looking at the code? And I think, to your point, Mark, you could definitely make an innocuous looking thing that had a lot of data in it, like, oh, this is just it puts up JPEGs, and in the middle of the JPEG is the actual code, but you could see that it was running it in a complicated way. So I think it's pretty visible. I mean, you see what code is executing, right? It's your code. You just don't know what it means. It's doing some complicated cryptographic thing in some abstract space that you don't understand. And it's only when it gets to the output that, oh, now it all makes sense. And so I think it would be fairly visible by looking at execution traces that something funny was going on.
And the thing about what the thing does rather than what it computes, right? I mean, Turing complete computation can compute any computable function, but that doesn't mean all computers are equivalent. What they can do depends on what they're hooked up to, and that extends into the software. So the transparent and provable part of it might be the part that's hooked up to the actuators, in which case your proof holds independent of what the steganographic part might be computing.
Well, I just asked Steve in the chat if you are free to join us on June 19 when we have the AI discussion, because we've been referencing your ideas a lot. It would be wonderful to have you actually just discuss them, unpack them a little bit. We'll have Trent McConaughey, I think, join on AI DAOs, but yeah, it would be great to hear from you.
Sure. I'd be happy to do that. It just as a quick comment for Mark, I love the idea of, you've got the actuator. You could put limits on what that actuator does, even if it's a black box, which is controlling the actuator. You just, if the actuator says apply too much force, you just refuse to do it. And so it may be that we can create constraining, and I think you could have dumber software constraining more intelligent software. And so I think that's a powerful lever also.
Yeah, that's a fundamental part of what building secure software architectures is all about, is you have a process that internally you consider a black box, but then through security abstractions built on top of the secure operating system, you constrain how it interacts both with devices and with other processes. Let me give you, for people who are not software people, let me just explain a example that I think is a really nice intuition pop. And then I'll turn it over to Rick. I'm sorry, I saw you were raising your hand. We know that there are chess playing AIs that are very, very good at playing chess. We also know that there are legal move checkers that are very dumb, simple programs that can be analyzed in their entirety. It's easy to arrange a game playing computer such that whatever move the AI, which is unanalyzable, comes up with to try to move, that the trivial legal move checker has to approve it before it says, I want to make that move. And that's a trivial verifiable program that's tiny, constraining an arbitrarily large and opaque and intelligent system.
Great. That's a very succinct explanation. We quickly go to Rick, Jazir, and then I think we're on time.
Yeah, I think we're failing to address something that Eliezer Yudkowsky has been talking about for a long time, which is when your intelligence system becomes a better strategist, which includes it understands, it's got a great world model, it's got a great model of people. From that model, it can be very persuasive. Okay. Your ability to constrain it with these simple rules, okay, those simple rules may keep it from doing A, but they won't keep it from conspiring, from getting together a team simply by sending out messages and getting them aligned with a program, which involves, building the nano machine or even not even nano, just building the flash crash, the stock market system to get its work done.
Chris, Jazir.
Yeah, I think maybe I wanted to elaborate on Rick's point, but it was in response to Mark. I think the issue is about the meta layer or various meta layers. So I do believe that if an AI is expected to do a particular thing in a defined game, that you can have a very simple sort of rule checker that confirms that AI has made decisions based on the intent of the game, but you don't know what other games the AI might sort of be playing in ways that you didn't expect. So one simple example might be that it computes in such a way that it creates a really interesting electromagnetic field, due to the way that transistors are working. And that isn't really about the computation it's doing directly so much as it is the substrate upon which those computations are being done. And so I do think that there's this desire for a hyper intelligence or a super intelligence that is aware of all the things the AI could do in the world, and try to constrain it in across all games. That's obviously very challenging to even imagine. But to the extent that that is impractical, there's this other alternative, which is where we try and separate AIs. But I don't know. I don't know that there's a simple solution to this. I don't want to try to talk about one, given how much limited time we have. But I would say that the whole meta game or game warping issue is where you run into trouble with a simple rule checker.
Okay, cool. I'll give Mark space in case you have any kind of comments.
Yeah, I think that we're underestimating the power of computer security technology to limit what programs can do. When we do so, Jazir is completely right about substrate attacks. We've seen them with Rowhammer. Rowhammer is a great example of where the digital abstraction fails in a way that a program running within that digital system can cause, and can cause on purpose. And there's other things in the category of Rowhammer. However, that depends on the hardware having been built in a particularly vulnerable way. And when the hardware, there's many other pieces of hardware that are known not to be vulnerable to rowhammer. And in the history of computer security breaks, rowhammer is just about unique in being a substrate attack on integrity. I'm phrasing that very carefully because Meltdown and Spectre, you can think of those, and timing attacks, and creating electromagnetic signals that a conspirator outside might be able to pick up on, tempest attacks. These are attacks on confidentiality, on the limits of how far information gets to, and those are much harder to protect against, even with the secure operating system. I believe it is possible, but it's certainly much harder. I think that if we pay attention to the platform dangers, that we are not far away right now from building digital platforms in which the digital abstraction cannot be breached by software running on those abstractions, and in which we can have high confidence of that. And then once we've defended the digital abstraction, then the important thing I like to point out is that when you do a security proof, you say for all programs P running in this process, and that for all constraint does not have a loophole for IQ level. That, if that program has an IQ of 1,000,000, or however you want to put it, that for all proof still applies. So it has to get out by violating the platform if this operating system is genuinely secure. And I don't believe it is that hard for us to build unsubvertible hardware platforms.
Wow, that's a great way, A, to end the session, B, to foreshadow next week's discussion, which is about computer security, and with a really wonderful chapter written by Mark. And thirdly, also to just share with you again how you can now chime in if you feel inspired and book the book. So the bounty corresponding to this week's chapter is, what's the most important crypto tool we can use to defend against existentialism? We've already foreshadowed a few. Mark just put computer security here, like front row seat into the ring. You may have other ideas. So we want to, reward you for your ideas and for the really fantastic discussions that you bring to this group. So please, if you want to improve the book and make it into an iterative game, then the bounties are a good way forward for doing so. Okay, well, this was really, really wonderful. I'll be on Discord, between now and next week, to further collaboration and discussion on these topics. Thank you so much for staying 1 minute over. And yeah, it was terrifying. But I think now we at least have the facts on the table, with the hope that other people can go out and you guys can go out and build more secure systems. So thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful Sunday. And see you next week.